Introduction to the Third Edition. The issue of a third edition of these essays affords an opportunity not only for briefly describing the recent progress of Zoroastrian studies, but also for mentioning several emendations of the text which have been suggested and are more or less deserving of attention. For the convenience of the reader, these additions and suggested amendments are here given in the form of notes, with references to the pages of the text to which they relate, are in connection with which they should be read. Pages 3 and 4, the existence of a chief of the Magi at the court of Nebuchadnezzar has been disputed, and the title Rab Mag is said to mean commander of the fleet. The recent discovery of two cuneiform inscriptions of Cyrus, in which that king seems to proclaim his faith, and that of his son, Cambyses, in the Babylonian gods, has also been considered a sufficient disproof of his having professed the religion of the Magi. But it appears from hieroglyphic inscriptions that Cambyses was likewise a devoted adherent of the Egyptian divinities, and yet the flattering language used by Isaiah in speaking of Cyrus is hardly such as could be justifiably applied to an idolater. The only reasonable way of reconciling these three contradictory facts seems to be the acceptance of all of them as being true from different points of view. These kings, like all the great conquerors and statesmen compelled to govern many different races and religions, found it necessary to conciliate all their loyal subjects in turn, and thus induced the priests of each religion to applaud them as defenders and promoters of the particular faith which those priests advocated. Now, we can look at that and say, maybe they looked at some of it metaphorically, or they believed in one and they lied about the others. And certainly the priesthoods where there was some sort of need believed as far as the entities worshipped tended to be more powerful, or they had temples where the offerings were brought and all that stuff. Now you can offer to the one and only God, like the Jews were doing, and the Zoroastrians were doing, as we call that now. And I think it'd be better if these people back in the 1800s and stuff didn't add ism and change the names of things. So when we hear the real name of an individual or a religion, that we wouldn't recognize it. We might say, well, that sounds like this. Is it the same thing? We should know it's the same thing. Page 5, the identity of Hara, the Avesta name of the mountain, supposed to encompass the earth, which is closer in a way to Hira, but it's not believed literally as a central mountain, right? And the Hebrew Har, a mountain, may be disputed. Page 53, the last 6 years have been a period of considerable activity among European investigators of the Parsi scriptures, and in some cases, new views regarding the origin of Zoroastrianism have been advocated, which are so revolutionary in their character as to require much more adaptation to long-recognized facts than they have yet received before they can be safely adopted by careful scholars. Without attempting any exhaustive enumeration or analysis of the works and essays that have been published, the following may be mentioned as best known to the writer. M.C. de Harlez has not only completed his French translation of the Avesta mentioned in page 51, but has also published a second edition of the work with an extended introduction to the study of the Avesta and the Mazdean religion, which, though disfigured by numerous misprints and capable of improvement in many of its details, is a very instructive treatise on the history, scriptures, and dogmas of Zoroastrianism. Both in this treatise and in this essay on the origin of Zoroastrianism, published in the journal Asiatique de Origines du Zoroastrianisme par M.C. de Harlez, extrait du Journal Asiatique, Paris, 1879 to 1880. M. de Harlez expresses two opinions of some novelty, which require much more evidence to support them than he has yet been able to collect. One of these opinions is that Darius Hystaspes was not a Zoroastrian, although his cuneiform inscriptions proclaim his faith in Au Ramazda, but as Au Ramazda is a compound name traceable to the two terms Ahura and Mazda, used separately by Zarathustra and his successors in the Gathas, and never becoming an actual compound in any part of the Avesta, it is only reasonable to suppose that this compound must have originated at a later date than its component parts. Now, some things in the Old Avesta, even, we can say is like that. So was the Old Avesta something along the lines of what happened with what they call the New Testament? The original stuff was in Syriac or Aramaic, and then it got put into another language, right, at a later period by people who weren't eyewitnesses, thank you very much. In other words, we must continue to believe that Darius lived later than Zarathustra and professed the same religion as he did, unless it can be shown that faith in Au Ramazda was something materially different from faith in Ahura Mazda, as stated in the Gathas, the only portion of the Avesta that can be quoted as embodying the faith of Zarathustra himself. Now, the Young Avesta, which is after the 1700 to 2000 BCE portion, we can say that that is, representative at the very least. It is unusual to assume that the laws relating to ceremonial impurity, the disposal of the dead, and similar matters are Zoroastrianism. But we have no real authority for tracing them to Zarathustra himself, and they have more the appearance of being either later sacerdotal developments or mere tolerations of older customs. Now, what happens with what's called religion tends to be you have a prophet or a founder or people who were the original workers, and then what happened before makes its way in, and what happened after makes its way in. And I'm sure we'll have a lot more indications of that later, right? The other novel opinion of M. de Harles is that Zarathustra may have come into contact with some of the captive Israelites in Media in the 8th century BCE. And over in Afghanistan, they have influence of that group too, from that period onward, from whom he may have imbibed the monotheistic ideas and general tone of morality which he adapted to his former faith. Now, all of that can be said to go back into prehistory for the most part, really. In other words, M. de Harles wishes to believe that all the good in Zoroastrianism has sprung from Hebrew ideas. But historical Hebrew ideas tend to show the other way around, right? We know too little of Zarathustra's real history to form any definite opinion as to the possibility of his being in Media at the time mentioned, but it would have been strange if a people who, like the Israelites, were led into captivity on account of their idolatry should have become such ardent teachers of monotheism as to lay the foundation for a durable form of that faith differing materially from that professed by their own priesthood. And it's important to take things beyond material culture. No? M. de Harles has also published useful French manuals, both the Avesta and Pahlavi languages, containing grammars and selections for reading with the necessary glossaries. Manuel de la langue de la Avesta, Grammaire, Anthologie, Lexique, Paris, 1878, Manuel de Pahlavi, de Manuscrits, Grammaire, Anthologie, Lexique, Legende Paris, 1880. A very different view of the origin of Zoroastrianism has been adopted by M. James Dermestetter in his English translation of the Vendidad. See Rosa Yash's Nya Yish, published in the series of Sacred Books of the East, volumes 4 and 23. The translations themselves are of a very masterly character, giving full weight to the teachings of tradition, but they might, in many cases, have been made more literal, and in some places rather too much consideration has been paid to traditional renderings that are probably later than the Pahlavi versions, notwithstanding this tendency to give an almost undue consideration to tradition in his translations. The views adopted by M. Dermestetter in his introduction to the origin of Zoroastrianism would trace all its legends and even the person of its founder to a series of meteorological myths altogether inconsistent with tradition, but affording simple steps for the exercise of a vivid imagination. Well, there's a lot of astrological material in a lot of traditions that even condemn what we tend to think of astrology. Now, you could say they didn't use astrology that way. They put things in astrological language. But I've talked about that in my Astrology Without Idolatry program. But yeah, I believe that Zarathustra was at least one real person. And each revival period, up to a certain point, could have been, right? So there was a real person, and then there was a real reviver in the Magian period, and in the Achaemenid period. So they could have put 3 people into what was going on. To obtain this result, however, some valuable results of older researches have to be sacrificed. The striking fact that the gods of the Brahmins have become the demons of the Zoroastrianism, and vice versa, see page 268, is no longer admitted as arguing some former enmity or schism between the 2 religions, but is assumed to be only the result of the survival of 2 different names for gods, one of which was accidentally selected as supreme by one religion and the other by the other religion. And it may not have been competition with the 2 faith groups at all. It could have just been competition between the Persians and the other 4 Aryan tribes, or Iranians, or there's some dispute which one you should use, but you know what I mean. Inasmuch as this assumption gives no reason for the accidental selection, it is less reasonable than the older theory of a schism, even if the latter were unsupported by further facts of a similar character. M. Dermestetter has also published in French a valuable collection of Iranian studies, including a comparative grammar of the language of Persia from the time of Darius to that of Firdausi, with several essays on particular details of Iranian etymology, mythology, and legend, as well as transcripts of the original text of some Pahlavi, Sanskrit, and Persian translations of the Yashts and Nya Yishes. Etudes Iraniennes par James Dermestetter, Etudes sur la grammaire historique de la langue persane melanges iraniennes et traductions indigenes de Corda Avesta, Paris, 1883. Turning to the German scholars who have recently devoted their attention to the literature of the Parsis, Dr. W. Geiger may have noticed, as a judicious scholar and careful writer, to his Pahlavi version of the first chapter of the Vendidad, with German translation and commentary, Die Pahlavi-Version de Ersven Capitels des Vendedade herausgegeben, nebst dem Versuch einer ersten Übersetzung und Erklärung von der Wilhelm Geiger Erlangen, 1877. It has been chiefly objected that his transcript of the Pahlavi text in Hebrew characters is much less useful than the one in Roman type would be, and as Pahlavi is now known to be an Iranian language which merely employs a limited number of Semitic words to express itself in writing, the use of a purely Semitic alphabet is likely to give students an erroneous idea of the character of the language. Yeah, there's a lot of that. Well, let's put, instead of using Farsi or something, let's use Hebrew. It is probably, however, that Dr. Geiger will abandon the use of Hebrew type and perhaps use the original Pahlavi character if he should hereafter continue his Pahlavi version of the Vedadad, of which this first chapter was intended merely as a specimen. In his Aogema da Eka, Aogema da Echa ein Parsen Traktat in Pazend, alt Baktrisk und Sanskrit herausgegeben, übersetzt, erklärt und mit Glosser versehen von Dr. Wilhelm Geiger Erlangen, 1878. Is it Cha or Ka? I think it's supposed to be Ka. He has published for the first time a short Pazan Sanskrit text commencing with that Avesta word, together with a German translation, commentary, and glossary. This text also occurs in Pahlavi, see page 99 and 100, and seems to be a kind of meditation on death and the state of the soul after death. Like the Nirangastan, it is interspersed with many Avesta passages, which constitute more or less completely the original text, but these have been translated and amplified by the Pahlavi commentator in the usual manner of an Avesta Pahlavi text. There can be little doubt that we have here a fragment of one of the lost Nasks, which has not yet been identified. Dr. Geiger has also published a very complete German handbook of the Avestan language containing a grammar, selections for reading, and the necessary glossary. Handbuch der Avestasprach Grammatik Christomatidathi und Glosser von Dr. Wilhelm Geiger Erlangen, 1879. But his most comprehensive work is a German account of the civilization of Eastern Iran in ancient times. Austirandische Kultur im Altertum von Wilhelm Geiger mit einer Webersichtskarte von Astiran Erlangen. In this book, he has not only detailed all the allusions to manners and customs, laws, and superstitions which occur in the Avesta, but has also minutely investigated the probable geography of all the places mentioned therein. This investigation carefully avoids the common error of confusing latter geographical statements of the Bundahish with the earlier ones in the Avesta, and shows how little alteration is required in the hypothesis of earlier scholars in order to bring them up to the present state of our knowledge on the subject. Professor H. Hubschmann, who had formerly written several essays on particular portions of the Avesta, has now turned his attention chiefly to the Armenian language, but under the title of Iranian Studies, Iranische Studien, Zeitschrift für Vergleichende Sprachforschung, 24, page 323 to 415. He has published an important German essay on the Avesta alphabet with some remarks on the alphabetical systems of other Iranian languages, as it is utterly impossible to ascertain the exact pronunciation of any living language a few centuries ago. It is useless to attempt any great precision in expressing the sounds of a language that has been dead for a millennium. Well, there's a couple different traditions, right? Professor Hubschmann has, therefore, been satisfied with ascertaining the general character of the sound of each letter and pointing out its proper place in the alphabetical system. His researches will have been carefully considered by anyone who wishes to improve the usual systems of transliteration, but his own mode of transcription is more scientific than practical, being too much burdened with Greek letters and diacritical marks. Among these younger scholars, Professor K. Geldner is one of the chief representatives of the school which trusts to etymology and its own ingenuity rather than accept the teachings of tradition in studying the meaning of the Avesta. In the German work on the meter of the latter Avesta, Über die Metrik des Jüngeren Avesta nebst Übersetzung ausgewählter Abschnitt von Karl Geldner, Tübingen, 1877, has exercised much ingenuity and perseverance in discovering metrical passages not only where they undoubtedly exist, but also where their existence may reasonably be doubted. He shows that many passages can be made truly metrical either by the omission of certain words, which may be considered as mere glosses, or by some slight alteration of words or syllables, so that strict attention to meter may become a valuable means of amending the text. To a considerable extent, his conclusions are certainly correct, but unless his method be used with extreme caution, it may easily convert the most prosaic passage into modern verse, which it would be folly to attribute to the ancient writer. In his studies on the Avesta, Studien zum Avesta von Karl Geldner, Strasbourg, 1882, he gives many specimens of his etymological powers, which are of a very high order, but after all, Sanskrit is not our only source of knowledge. For determining the meaning of Avesta words, we have remnants of old tradition, diluted with medieval commentary in the Pahlavi versions, which, however forbidding in appearance, are apt, like other rugged friends, to rise in our estimation as we become better acquainted with them. It is this tradition that Professor Geldner should carefully study before he proceeds to carry out his scheme of an improved Avesta lexicon of the preliminary investigations for which these studies were intended as a specimen. He is now actively engaged in the preparation of a new edition of Westergaard's Avesta texts, and as, through the hearty cooperation of the owners of manuscripts in India, he will be able to consult all the best sources of information known to exist. It may be presumed that his edition of the texts will contain all that can be expected until some other family of manuscripts is discovered in Persia. An American clergyman, the Reverend L. H. Mills, has been studying the Gathas for several years and has carefully considered the writings and opinions of all scholars who have examined these ancient hymns. So he's kind of like the King James Version of the Bible, all this stuff, right? The result of his studies and inquiries is in the press and will include the Avesta, Pahlavi, Sanskrit, and Persian versions of the hymns, with English translations of the first three. Well, I would skip Sanskrit rather than the Farsi, but the study of the Avesta has also been taken up in Italy, where Professor Pizzi has published the Tishtar Yasht with an Italian translation. Tishtar Yasht, the Inno a Tistria nel Avesta
testo zendo con traduzione a commento saggio del dot Professor J. Missy Estrato della Memorie della Real Accademia della Scienze de Torino, Serie 2, Tome 35, Torino, 1882.
Among the European contributions to the study of apophthegm may be mentioned the German translation of the Carnamaki
Artakshii Papakan by Professor Noldeck, who has also done much to illustrate the period of the Pahlavi writings by his German History of the Persians and Arabs in the time of the Sassanians, translated from the Arabic of Tabari. Geschichte der Perser und Araber zu Zeit zur Sassaniden aus der arabischen Chronik des Tabari übersetzt und mit ausführlichen Erläuterungen und Ergänzungen Version von the Noldeck, Leiden, 1879. While Dr. Andreas has done good service to the Pahlavi students by his edition of the Pahlavi Ma'inyo Ikard, published in facsimile from the only manuscript of the original Pahlavi text known in Europe. The book of Ma'inyo Ikard, also an old fragment of the Bundahesh, both in the original Pahlavi, being a facsimile of a manuscript brought from Persia by the late Professor Westergaard, and now preserved in the University Library of Copenhagen, edited by Frederick Charles Andreas, Kiel, 1882. And Dr. West has made several Pahlavi works accessible to English readers by his translations of the Bundahish, Bafanyast, Shahyost, La Shahyost, Dadastana Danik, and epistles of Manushihar, published in the series of Sacred Books of the East, Volume 5 and 18. We've shared that on the channel before. Page 58. The probable meaning of the Pahlavi word Vehi Jakik, or rather Ve'i Chakik, is fit for anything good, auspicious. Page 90. Two more volumes of Dastur Peshotunji's Dean Card have been published. The slow progress of this work appears to be due to no want of energy on the part of the editor, but to the pecuniary delays and difficulties that usually beset the publication of a long series of volumes by subscription. Arrangements have been made for early publication of the Pazand, Sanskrit, and Pahlavi text of the Shikand Gumani with the vocabulary under the joint editorship of Dr. Hoshangji and Dr. West. Page 61. Dastur Jamaspji has published 3 volumes of his Pahlavi, Gujarati, and English dictionary, which he explains the meaning of more than 7,000 words, but has advanced only as far as Aivrar. Following the order of the Sanskrit alphabet, his collection includes both actual words and copyist errors with their traditional readings and meanings he attaches to them. So far, he has discovered about 20 times as many words as have been previously glossarized, but this excess will probably diminish as the work proceeds. The meanings have evidently been carefully considered, but no one acquainted with the uncertainties of Pahlavi readings will expect any great accuracy in determining the meaning of unusual words until all the texts containing them have been satisfactorily translated. Page 85. The word Huzvarish or more correctly, Auzvarish is a variant of Zuvarish, being old or worn out, an abstract noun derived from the verb Zvaridon. Dermastester prefers tracing it directly to the Avestan Zabar, to be crooked, distorted, or perverted, or to the allied form Zavara, borrowed by the Arabs in the sense of he altered or corrupted the text, with the idea of that Huzvarish means a disguised mode of writing, but we have no reason to suppose that Huzvarish was adopted for the purpose of concealment, as it was used in all Persian writing of the Sasanian times. It would be better described as the use of obsolete words in writing, and the word Zuvarish, whether it means decay or antiquity, would express this idea sufficiently well. Page 87, Note 1. It seems more probable that the common Huzvarish termination, man, is merely an altered mode of writing. The single Sasanian letter, whose pronunciation is uncertain. Professor Levy has suggested that it is the Semitic, which has no other representative separate from KH in the Sasanian alphabet. But if it were that H, why was it not used in Hu, Havint, Yahfun, and the prefix of hepfil verbs? And why was it used as an equivalent of the Chaldean emphatic termination Page 98, transcripts of the Pahlavi translations of the Khurshid Mah and Srosh Hadokt Yash and of the Khurshid Niayesh have been published by Dermasteder in his Etudes Iranides, page 99. An independent manuscript of the Narangistan, brought from Persia a few years ago, is said to be more complete and accurate than those previously in India, is now in the possession of Mr. Tehmuras Dinsauji and Klasaria of Bombay, page 100. Transcripts of the Pazand and Sanskrit version of the Ogamadecha, or Ogamadecha, with its Avesta passages, have been published with a German translation by Dr. Geiger, as mentioned above, page 37. Okay, we're in 41 of this. Page 102. An independent copy of about 1/5 of the Dean card has been recently discovered in a manuscript brought from Persia by the late Professor Westergaard in 1843, and now in the University Library at Copenhagen. This manuscript contains 4 chapters of the 3rd book, the whole of the 5th, nearly all of the 6th, and about 3/10 of the 9th book. The copy of the 6th book is dated 95 years earlier than the manuscript in Bombay, and is decidedly more correct. It appears from a manuscript of the Daristani Danik, brought from Persia by the late Professor Westergaard in 1843, and now in the University Library at Copenhagen, that the correct date given by its author is, in one of his epistles, is AY 250 or 881 of the Common Era. An English translation of this work, and also of the epistles of Madoshchihar, which are found in the same manuscript, has been published in the 18th volume of the Sacred Books of the East, and a portion of the selections of Zadsparam has likewise been translated from these manuscripts and published in the 5th volume of the same series. Page 105. An English translation of the Bundahish has been published in the 5th volume of the Sacred Books of the East, but it is now known that the Bundahish contained in the Indian manuscripts is only a collection of extracts from a larger work of about 30,000 words, of which 2 complete manuscripts brought from Persia are now in the possession of Mr. Tahmaras Dinshauji and Losaria of Bombay. A fragment of the last chapter of the larger Bundahish has also been found in the manuscript of Westergaard containing the Dean card at Copenhagen, and has been published in facsimile by Dr. Andreas in his edition of the Pahlavi Minoki Kirad. Page 106. The original Pahlavi text of the Minoki Kirad, as contained in Westergaard's manuscript, has been published in facsimile by Dr. Andreas, as mentioned above. Page XXXIX, so we're XLII. And a more complete manuscript of the same text has been recently brought from Persia to Bombay and is now in the possession of Mr. Tehmaras Dinshauji and Glasaria. These 2 manuscripts are the only copies of the original Pahlavi text yet known. They confirm the general opinion of the substantial accuracy of Nayar Song's Pazan Sanskrit version, while at the same time they show that he occasionally misunderstood the Pahlavi text or altered it to make it more intelligible. He has also omitted 2 or 3 short passages containing names which he could not identify. An English translation of the Shayast La Shayast has been published in the 5th volume of the Sacred Books of the East. Page 107. It appears from the English translation of the Bahman Yasht in the 5th volume of the Sacred Books of the East that it does not mention the Muslimans by name, although many of the details evidently refer to the devastations committed by them, as well as by the Turanians and the Christians. Well, sometimes it's the people who later became Muslim, like the Mongols or the Turks, right? But sometimes the Muslims don't have behaviors that are Islamic, too, so you can't say, oh, political Islam. No such thing if it's conflicting with Islam. Another copy of the Pahlavi text has been discovered in the manuscript of Westergaard containing the Dean card at Copenhagen, but this copy is neither so old nor so correct as the one previously known to exist in the same library. Page 111. A German translation of the Karnamaki Arakshiri Papakan has been published by Professor Noldeck, as mentioned above, page 39. An English translation of the Madigani Haft Ameshaspen has been published in the 5th volume of the Sacred Books of the East, a part of the appendix to the Shayast Lashayast. Page 113, the supposed Pahlavi version of the Saddar, or the Saddar Bundahish, has been examined and found to be merely a portion of the Shayast La Shayast. It is doubtful whether the name of the Saddar Bundahish, which is a Persian work distinct from the Saddar, is correctly read. It is frequently quoted in the Persian Rivayats, but the name is there written in 3 different modes, which can be reconciled only by reading Sad Darbanda Hush. To the Pahlavi text already detailed must be added a fragment of an old manuscript obtained by Mr. Tehmaras Dinshauji and Klasaria from Persia a few years ago, and now in his library. This fragment consists of 20 large folios containing about 8,600 words, and is incomplete at both ends. Its first folio being numbered 74, it appears to be part of a very full treatise on the laws of property, somewhat analogous to one portion of the Husparam Nask, as stated in the Dean card, and it contains many quotations of the opinions of the old commentators, whose names occur in the Pahlavi Vendadad. Several of the later Sasanian kings are also mentioned, as Udanyim is one of the commentators whose opinions are cited. This work is probably not older than the Dadastani Danik, which was written by the son of a high priest of that name. One of the manuscripts of the larger Bundahish, belonging to Mr. Tahmaras, page XLII, we are in XLIII, also contains about 270 questions and answers on miscellaneous subjects ascribed to Hamadi Asha Bahishtan, who was probably the father of the last reviser of the Deen card, as the extent of these questions and answers is 3/4 of that occupied by the larger Bundahish. They must contain about 22,000 words. Of the total extent of Pahlavi literature now known to be extant, which may be estimated as consisting of about 569,000 words, the texts which have been edited do not amount to more than 182,000 words. The text translated into English contained about 158,000 words, and the German translations include about 7,600 words of further texts. Now, if I can present more of these in the future that I haven't presented, definitely intended, right? Regarding the age of the Pahlavi books in their present form, some definite information has been recently obtained. The third epistle of Manushehar is dated AY 250, so 881 of the Common Era, so that his other work, the Dadastani Danik and the selections of Zadsparam, who was his brother, must have been also written about the latter half of the 9th century of the Common Era. It also appears from Bundahish 33, 10, and 11 that the writer of that chapter, which forms part of the larger Bundahish, was a contemporary of Zadsparam and also of Aturapad, son of Hamid, who is mentioned in the Neen card as the last reviser of that extensive work. With this information, we may safely refer to the latest recensions of both the Bundahish and Neen card to the latter half of the 9th century, although some copyist of the last chapter of the Bundahish has added his own date, AY 527, so 1158 of the Common Era, to that chapter. We are further told by Manushehar, Epistle 1, 4, 15, and 17, that Nishahpuhar, the Mobud of Mobuds, was a consigliere of King Khusro, son of Kavad, surnamed Anushirvan, 531 to 579 of the Common Era. Now, Nishahpuhar is the name of a commentator often quoted in the Pahlavi Vendadad and Nirangastan, and in the Arda Viraf Namak is said to have been a title of Arda Viraf. We are therefore justified in ascribing the latest recensions of these three works to some period after the 6th century, before the 9th, when the first two were quoted by Manushehar. The oldest Pahlavi fragment that has been discovered consists of several fragments of papyrus found 5 or 6 years ago in the Fayum district in Egypt. On these fragments, many Pahlavi words are distinctly legible in writing of the 8th century, but the sentences are too fragmentary to admit of complete decipherment. Page 121, as the connection of the Avestan Ve with the Pahlavi Avi, written Api, is liable to dispute. The word of Avazak pure may be quoted as one in which it is quite certain that the Avesta V has taken the form of P in Pahlavi. Page 174, chapters 19 to 21 of the latter Yasna are called the Bakam in some manuscripts, and as the first three Fargards of the Bakonask are said in the Deen card to have treated of the same subjects, it is probable that these chapters were taken from that Nask. Page 217, the star Vanant is called the southern leader of the stars in the Bundahish, and as such may be best identified with Fomalhaut. Page 272, it should be borne in mind that those who are opposed to the author's views as to an ancient schism between primitive Zoroastrianism and primitive Brahmanism, that he is here collecting all the facts that tend to uphold this hypothesis, but he does not mean to assert that all these facts are of equal value. It is quite possible to explain away some of these facts as accidental coincidences without sensibly weakening the argument based on other facts that are more refractory. Thus, we know too little about the personal history of the Zoroastrian demons Indra, Saurva, and Na'an Ha'ithya to enable us to judge whether the resemblance of their names to those of the Brahmanical sacred beings Indra, Sharva, and Nasatya be more than accidental coincidence. But if these coincidences be accidental, that fact does not weaken the argument based upon the words Ahura and Da'eva being used by the Zoroastrians in an opposite sense to the Asura and Deva of the Brahmins, and upon the change that took place in the meaning of Asura in the latter Vedic period. The question is whether these developments of meaning in opposite directions can be better explained by any other hypothesis than that adopted by the author, and by one that is more consistent with all the facts of the case. Page 296, according to the genealogy of Zarathustra, preserved in the Bundahish, Dean Card, and other Pahlavi books, Ha'et Chadaspa was his great-great-grandfather, page 298, with reference to the lineage of Vishtaspa. It should be observed that Urva Daspa, his father, was not a son but a cousin of his own predecessor, Kava Husrava. According to Bundahish, chapter 31, verse 28, the genealogy of Vishtaspa was as follows: Ka'i Kavad, Kavi Kavata, Ka'i Apiveli, Kave Epe Vangu, Ka'i Pisin, Kave Pisananga, Manush, Uzav, Lahorasp, Urvadaspa, Vishtasp. But this family lineage is quite as different from that of Darius Hystaspes as the succession of kings' names given in the text. Page 299, the author has mentioned, page 1536, 264, other dates that might be suggested for Zarathustra on various grounds and according to various modes of calculation. But in his introduction to the Zund Pahlavi glossary, he was inclined to adopt the date BCE 610 mentioned in page 15, and to this opinion he seems to have subsequently adhered. This opinion, however, depends entirely upon certain statements of Parsi and Muslim writers, and these are evidently based upon the identification of Vishtaspa with the progenitor of Darius, which has been shown to be exceedingly doubtful. The Bundahish, which evidently adopts this view, makes the interval between the beginning of the reign of Vishtaspa and that of Alexander a period of 288 years, which corresponds very well with the 280 years mentioned by Masudi, page 15, but the chronological chapter of the Bundahish is a comparatively modern addition to that work, being specially heated by the words Madam, Shnat, Mari Tazikan on the year reckoning of the Arabs, and cannot therefore be quoted as an independent authority of ancient date on this subject. It is also necessary to observe that the language in which Zarathustra and his early successors composed their Gathas is closely allied to the Vedic Sanskrit. If, therefore, we place Zarathustra in the 7th century BCE, we must be prepared to assign nearly the same date to the Vedas. Well, it was Samskrita means that it was, revised from something earlier or refined, Page 317, Dharmastetter translates the reply of Ahura Mazda in Vendidad 3:11 as follows: It is the place whereon the wife and children of one of the faithful of Spitama Zarathustra are driven along the way of captivity, the dry, the dusty way, and lift up a voice of wailing. And Geiger takes the same view of the passage in his Astirencht Culture, page 190. Page 322, note 1, the term Gokard Homand means brimstone, and Sa'okantavitim means provided with burning matter or ignitable. From the latter word comes the Persian Saugand, an oath, which is always said to be eaten when it is administered, because it is formerly meant swallowing the prepared water as an ordeal. Whether you do well with some sort of torture or something like that, doesn't really point out whether you're truthful or not, you know. Page 335. The term buhumano, here translated good-minded man, is also applied to his clothing, as Dermastetter has observed, and at Vendidad 19:20-25 it appears sometimes to mean the one and sometimes the other. The sadara, or sacred shirt, is called the buhumanoik. Vistarg, garment of Bohuman, in the Dadastani Denik 39:19, 48:9, because it is needful to be perfectly pure white and single, which onefold is because Bohuman also is thus the one creature who was first, and afterwards from him the garment which is innermost and concealed is called revelation. Dadastani Denik 40, verse 2. Page 346, note 3. The Pahlavi equivalent of Krauz Dishteng should be read Sakto Sago Nechuft, hard stone covered, referring to the old idea that the sky is formed of ruby-colored adamant so as to be indestructible by wear. In the Pahlavi translations, Sag is usually written for Sung, stone, page 366, 4, 9. Better thus, he used the goad of reasoning, so that one groans at it. Some say that one atones. The word mar may either mean a miscreant or the account of a sin to be rendered. Page 372, 30, 70. The name of Druge is not Kuduk, disgrace, but Auduk, Avestan Uda, a demon who is described in Bundahis 28:19 as endeavoring to make men speak at those times when they have taken a prayer inwardly and ought to be silent. By speaking at such times, they are supposed to break the spell produced by the prayer, lose its protection, and commit a serious sin. Page 374, number 44, 98a. It's better to speak of the origin instead of the beginning of a Tanapuhar sin. The sin is supposed to take root in the sinner and can be eradicated only by a proportional amount of good works. Page 377, 62, 124a. Better thus, and it is no matter to her. Page 378, 69, 137. Better thus, he should slaughter 1,000 young cattle. The last 5 notes have been suggested by Dermastetter's criticism of the second edition. Page 381, 5:18. The name of the water is better read Kyansai or Kyansi. It is the brackish lake and swamp, now called Hamun, the desert, or Zara, the sea, which formerly contained fresher water than it does now. Page 385, 2377. The Vohumano Vistarg is a sacred shirt. See the remarks above regarding page 335. And the good-minded one, Vohuman, of 78, is probably the same. We ought to read so that those divinely produced stars shall illuminate it, as Roshaninem is no doubt a miswriting of Roshanina. There being very little difference between a and m in many manuscripts. Page 388, 31, 102a. Better thus, where he performs the duty of controlling those acting as household attendants, Kavagi man Karano, in the Dadastani Denik 31:5, we are told that Bohuman makes the righteous souls household attendants of Auharmazd. And October 1883, E.W. West wrote this, and
The first chapter is going to be the history of the researches into the sacred writings and religion of the Parsis from the earliest times down to the present. I'm probably going to break these down into the individual parts of the chapter.